Chapter 11. Kaylyn expelled a sigh of frustration and rolled her eyes before she closed the door. Crossing her arms, she strolled towards Matthew, who had already taken a seat on a single-seat sofa. His legs were crossed, his face set in a no-nonsense expression. Kaylyn, however, was not intimidated by the intensity of his gaze or the grim line his mouth was drawn into. "There's nothing to talk about," she shrugged, arms still crossed. Matthew ground his teeth, so much so that she could see the muscles working up in his jaw. "I'm not here to play games, Kaylyn, so why don't you just cut the crap and let's get this over with," he bit out between tightly clenched teeth. Kaylyn huffed out a breath. "Who said this was a game?" "I have nothing to say to you, so you're wasting your own time," she said in the same hard tone. Matthew rose from the sofa, buttoned the single button on his jacket and moved to stand directly in front of Kaylyn, staring down at her. Kaylyn swallowed and held her head high, staring up at him, not deterred by his huge form. Don't what, Matthew?" she spat harshly, cutting him off. "Pretty brave of you walking in here like you own this damn place, like you own me or anything of mine." "I don't have to say shit to you, so stop acting like you own me," she said heatedly. "I own the child you are carrying," he fired back, causing Kaylyn to slightly wince. "I am the father and I have a right to know what the hell that doctor said to you." "I have a right to know if everything's alright," he fumed. Kaylyn, who was fuming also, took another step to Matthew and jabbed her index finger at his chest. "You lost the right to everything when you barged in here days ago, thinking that my child was for sale." She knew she was playing with fire, but at the moment she didn't mind a little burn. Matthew grabbed her wrist and she gasped. "You should know better than to mess with me, Kaylyn." "I'll put you through hell," he exclaimed disconcertingly. There was silence, their eyes locking in a heated battle, none cowering under the intensity of the other's gaze. Seconds seemed like minutes and a minute seemed like an eon. Matthew released his hold on her wrist and sighed, realizing the more he pushed, the more adamant she got. "Look, I just want to know what happened," he paused. "Please," he completed in a plea-like cry of desperation. Kaylyn was hesitant, but she decided to tell him everything to have him out of her hair. The last thing she needed in her day was an arrogant man. "I fainted. The doctor said it may be low blood count or—" She trailed off, wondering if she should fill him in on the seriousness of the matter. "Something else," she decided on saying. Matthew's forehead wrinkled. "Something else?" he questioned. Kaylyn sighed and ran a hand through her hair, all the emotions of the day rushing back. "They said that if I faint again it might be serious," she croaked, voice cracking with emotions. Matthew swallowed. "How serious?" he asked. She cleared her throat. "I don't know." Matthew grounded his teeth. "So that's all they said?" "If you faint again it might be serious?" he questioned firmly, and not waiting on Kaylyn to answer the question, he continued. "So you should just sit around, hoping not to faint again?" he hissed. "What if you do and it is serious?" "What?" He trailed off and raked his hand through his hair. "Get ready, I'm taking you to a real doctor," he complained stormily. Kaylyn gasped. "It can be noth dash. Or it could be something." "What are you going to do, sit around waiting for it to happen or not to happen? It's best to know ahead of time." "I'm not going anywhere with you," she exclaimed, crossing her arms. "Can you quit being so goddamn stubborn and just stop to think about the baby?" he fired angrily. Kaylyn scoffed, staring at Matthew in disbelief. "Think about the baby?" "Think about the baby," she repeated in bewilderment. "The baby is who I think about 24/7. I'm scared out of my mind for it, so don't you dare come in here telling me to think about the baby," she spat, feeling her eyes begin to glow with the tears brimming in them. Matthew flinched when he saw how distraught she was, and he immediately felt guilty. Moving towards her, he was unsure of how she'd react, but he felt like taking his chances, so he cautiously pulled her into his arms, allowing her to sob against his chest. Kaylyn didn't protest, she needed a shoulder to cry on and Matthew so happened to be there, so she let it all out. He hushed her, and was surprised at the fact that he found comfort in comforting her. Maybe he was to be blamed for her grief, but he planned on making things better. It was full time he handled the situation like he had some sense. "I'm sorry, Kaylyn. I didn't mean to be so insensitive," he cut himself off. "We didn't exactly start off on a good foot, but I want to help." Kaylyn brushed the tears from her face and stepped a foot back, feeling her cheeks warm when she realized how putty she had gone in Matthew's arms. The last thing she wanted was for him to think she was defenseless. "I can manage alone," she croaked and cleared her throat. Matthew sighed. "Please allow me to help you." "I am willing," I apologized, "and now I'm willing to give you my support." "Why don't you accept?" "What do you want from me?" he asked in frustration, flabbergasted by how stubborn the woman was. "That's the thing, I don't want anything from you," she bit out, knowing he was right. She was stubborn, but she still couldn't forget how he handled the situation days ago. She was still unforgiving about that and did not welcome any suggestions that he now had. Matthew raked his fingers through his hair. "I tried to be civil, but you have now forced me to show you just how far I can go, and I am willing to go far for this baby's sake," he ground out angrily. "Pack your things now, princess." "You're moving in with me," he exclaimed. Kaylyn gasped. "Are you insane?" "I will not." "You will, because if you don't, I'll ruin you. I'll make sure that no one in the entire state hires you for a job. I'll make sure that you won't even have enough money to buy yourself a bottle of water." Kaylyn swallowed. "So you're threatening me now?" She cocked a brow challengingly. "That's exactly what I'm doing, and you better not take it lightly," he too cocked a brow. "I'm not moving in with you, Matthew, and that's final," she said. "You are moving in with me, Kaylyn, and that is final," he exclaimed firmly, his heated gaze locking with Kaylyn's. Chapter 12. Kaylyn snorted. "I don't know who the hell you think you are," she snapped. "But I'm not an obedient little puppy to order around when you feel like it." Matthew only stood, watching her, uninterested in the words that came from her mouth. He knew that this argument was one thing he intended to win. He wasn't interested in hearing anything else Kaylyn was saying, because his mind was made up and he wasn't planning on changing it anytime soon. He sighed when she continued to throw her insults at him. He saw the movements of her mouth but blocked the sounds out in his mind. He smiled watching her, surprised that he found the woman amusing. She was a spitfire, he knew that, but he was not going to be deterred by her slamming insults. Getting frustrated, he began walking towards Kaylyn's room, ignoring the gap that escaped her lips. He took his time, with not a care in the world, and went to her closet. He gazed at the outfits in concentration, as if pondering on what he should take out. He began to reach for a dress that was hanging in one corner of the closet, but Kaylyn slapped away his hand before he got the chance to take it down. He turned towards her, not missing her widened eyes and flushed face. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she yelled in outrage. Matthew released a light sigh. "What does it look like I'm doing?" he fired back. "Can you please get out of my closet and my room?" she exclaimed, lowering her voice by a tad. "Not until you are ready so we can both leave," he answered coolly. Kaylyn raked her fingers through her hair in frustration. "I am not going anywhere with you," she ground out slowly, each word emphasized and firm. Matthew cocked a brow. "Okay then, back to what I was doing," he expelled nonchalantly before continuing with his earlier task. Kaylyn grabbed him by the arms and pulled him away from her closet, but Matthew went back and continued anyway. She sighed in defeat. "Okay, fine. If I visit that doctor, will you stop with the pestering?" she asked almost pleadingly. "No. You are moving in with me whether or not you visit that doctor, which I might add, you will do by the way," he said as he knelt down to pull out a suitcase that was at the bottom. "You have a fiancé, goddammit, and despite the fact that we're having a child together, we're mere strangers," she exclaimed aloud. Matthew stopped to spare her a glance. "Your point?" He raised a brow. Kaylyn scoffed. "Are you an idiot?" she hissed. "I am not going to be the third leg in your relationship and I'm definitely not moving into your house." Matthew smiled at that and shook his head. You are the mother of my child. And she is the love of your life, she bit out. Matthew snorted. Kaylyn, I don't think there's much point in arguing with me when we both know how this will end. He stood and went to her drawers, rummaging through. Kaylyn gasped, realizing it was the drawer for her undies. Move, she slapped his hands. Matthew smirked. I've seen them before, you know. Kaylyn rolled her eyes and slammed the drawer shut. I am not going anywhere with you, Matthew, she said, hands akimbo. I think you are forgetting my earlier threat, he reminded softly. I think you're forgetting that I don't care, she fired back sharply. Very well then, he said, and grabbed the suitcase from the floor. If you won't open that drawer for me to get your other things, I guess you'll have to go shopping one day, he smiled, then strolled off, grabbing Kaylyn's hand. Let go of me, she clawed at his arms, but he didn't budge, as he continued walking, with a protesting Kaylyn behind. When they reached the door to leave, he stopped. This is your final chance to get what you want, else I'll drag you out of this house while you scream and kick, he said firmly. Kaylyn stood there fuming, knowing that no matter how hard she tried, this was one fight she had no chance of winning or had the strength for. She forcefully tugged her hand from Matthew's and stomped towards her room. Matthew smiled, leaning against the door-post. Less than 5 minutes later, she emerged with 2 strapped bags in hand. She had changed into a pair of her favorite, roomy, worn-out jeans and a hooded sweater, her hair caught in a ponytail. Her lips were pouted in vexation, and Matthew thought it was the cutest thing he'd ever seen. You can call your landlord when you're at my house, he said, opening the door and pausing to allow her to leave first. Kaylyn gave him a bitter glare before going through the door. Matthew exhaled a relieving sigh before he closed the door behind him. Give me the other bags, he said, pushing out his free hand. I am not an invalid, she hissed, then strolled off. On their drive to Matthew's house, Kaylyn sat, hands folded, while she glared blankly through the windows. She wished she hadn't gone to that club that night, because if she hadn't, none of this would be happening. She would still have her job, being the independent woman she always thought herself to be, but now all of that was taken from her, and she now had to stoop to the levels of a person she despised. Her phone rang, disrupting Kaylyn's thoughts as well as the silence in the car. She momentarily glanced at Matthew, whose eyes were still on the road, then she cleared her throat and answered, a bit hesitant when she realized the number was unknown. Hello, she said in a cool tone. Kaylyn, hi, how are you? Came Jason's voice, and she inwardly cringed. She didn't want to talk to him now. Oh hi. I'm fine, thanks for asking, she replied. That's good to hear. If you're wondering where I got your number, it's from the documents you left here, he defended. Kaylyn smiled. Oh, that's fine. And I want you to know that regardless of what happened earlier, I would still like for you to come work with me, he exclaimed into the phone. Really? Kaylyn chirped in amusement. Jason chuckled. Yes, really, he confirmed. Thank you, she said in relief, then glanced at Matthew, whose forehead wrinkled in curiosity. Can I call you back to finalize everything? She asked hopefully. Yes, actually I was about to say that. I'm running late for a meeting, so I'll call you later. Bye, he said before disconnecting the call. Kaylyn grinned, feeling happy. What's got you in such a chipper mood? Matthew queried, his gaze skeptical. The grin disappeared from her face as she sat glaring at him without answering. So this is it, Matthew sighed when they arrived at his house. Kaylyn slowly moved from the car, her eyes fixed on the house in front of her. The enormity of the structure did not shock her, because she had seen big houses before, in fact, lived in one, but this house before her was not only big, but beautiful. It was painted in a beautiful olive and cream, with palm trees lining the entrance and red roses sitting between each palm. She glanced at Matthew and she knew that he was awaiting a compliment from her, and she smiled inwardly, deciding to spite him. Kaylyn smoothly removed her bags from the back, and Matthew removed her suitcase. Daddy, a voice chirped from behind, causing Kaylyn to freeze. Matthew placed the suitcase on the floor and smiled, hoisting Sapphire in his arms. She tangled her hands around his neck and beamed at him. "Little pumpkin," he said, kissing her on the cheek. Kaylyn gaped at him. "You have a child?" she exclaimed in dismay. Chapter 13. Matthew sighed at Kaylyn's question. He had somehow forgotten to tell her about Sapphire. He glanced at Kaylyn, then at Sapphire, noting the curiosity that visibly smeared the small child's face. Her hands were wrapped around Matthew's neck and her legs around his waist. "Daddy, who's she?" Sapphire brought her face down to Matthew's ear and attempted to whisper. Matthew quickly kissed her on the forehead, before saying, "Pumpkin, this is a friend, she'll be staying with us." Sapphire skeptically gazed at Kaylyn intently, giving her a thorough once-over, then she grinned, showing the few front teeth that were missing. "Hi, I'm Sapphire Mayhew." "What's your name?" she asked brightly. Kaylyn stared at the chubby-cheeked child that was before her, still astonished by the news of her existence. The fact that Matthew had a child told Kaylyn to run for the hills. This was a huge deal, and she was certain she wasn't taken with the idea of wrecking a home. As soon as things calmed down a little, she would be setting the record straight with Matthew. Deciding to leave her questions for later, Kaylyn smiled and extended her hand. "You have a pretty name that's just as pretty as you," she complimented, and Sapphire blushed. "My name is Kaylyn Fisher," she completed with a smile. "Do you like fish?" she asked randomly. Kaylyn laughed. "Very much. I like it too, but Daddy gives me the one without the bone because he doesn't want it to stick in my throat, but I think I can eat it all by myself, and I tell him that I can, but he doesn't listen," Sapphire ranted, pouting at Matthew. Matthew watched the exchange that took place before him and couldn't resist smiling. Sapphire was normally the shy type when being introduced to people, and it had shocked him to see how she was chatting blatantly with Kaylyn. "Daddy, can I show Miss Kaylyn my room?" she chirped. Matthew's smile waned. Honey, Kaylyn has to get settled, how about later?" "Please," she insisted. Matthew sighed and turned to Kaylyn. "Is that okay with you?" he asked. Kaylyn's gaze shifted from Matthew to Sapphire, and she then knew she couldn't say no to a face like hers. "Of course." "Yay!" Sapphire cheered, jumping from Matthew. She grabbed Kaylyn's hand and began dragging her towards the house. Kaylyn stumbled, trying to keep up with her, but grinned. Matthew smiled as he watched, continuing to pull Kaylyn's luggage from the car. "Wow, your room is very pretty," Kaylyn complimented upon reaching the room, noting the lavender walls with butterfly stickers of all colors lining the edges. The bed was covered in pink sheets and stuffed animals, which covered half of the already big bed. "Thank you," she said, plopping down on the bed. "Are you really Daddy's fiend?" she asked, pulling a bunny towards her. Kaylyn sighed and took a seat beside her on the bed. "You could say that," she answered hesitantly. Sapphire smiled and patted the empty space next to her. "Come sit." Kaylyn did so. "There's an evil lady here, she says she is gonna marry Daddy, but I don't want her to. She'll take me away from Daddy, so I won't get to see him again." "Take you away?" Kaylyn repeated. "Yes, to board school," she provided solemnly. Kaylyn wondered if Matthew would really let that happen, to have his only child away from him to suit someone else, but then again, there was not much she knew about Matthew. Sapphire's words also told Kaylyn that Catherine was not her mother and there was not much a connection between the two. "Sapphire honey, I'll be right back and then you can show me around and help me unpack my things, okay?" She grinned. "Okay, but don't take too long, Oklahoma," she warned. Kaylyn smiled. "I won't," she reassured her before leaving the room. Kaylyn searched for Matthew, moving carefully down the long flight of stairs. She glanced around the area, trying to catch a glimpse of him or even a sound. She walked along, noting the well-polished furniture, darkly painted walls, and the artwork that lined them. It looked more of a bachelor's pad than a house that actually had a child. She spotted Matthew in what looked like the kitchen, and strolled towards him. "Would you like something to eat?" he asked as soon as he saw her. Why didn't you tell me you have a child? Kaylyn asked immediately, not delaying the topic. Matthew sighed. You never asked, he shrugged casually. Kaylyn's mouth fell open. You should have told me for Christ's sake, she blared, instantly lowering her voice when she thought about Sapphire. It wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have changed anything, he said, pouring them some orange juice. Kaylyn scoffed, staring at him in disbelief. Of course it would have, she exclaimed in hysteria. Nothing would change, he shrugged. Your fiancé will be around, I don't think I'll be able to handle that. This is all too much, she began pacing the room. Are you suggesting I break off the engagement? He asked, a conniving smile on his face. Kaylyn's eyes widened. Why, no, of course not. That's not what I was implying, she paled. Can I just go home, please? You know that's out of the question, he said, shoving a glass of drink to Kaylyn before he took a gulp of his. Kaylyn didn't have the appetite for anything, so she ignored his offer. Where are my things? She asked, getting frustrated. Why do you ask? He questioned quizzically. So I can go unpack, she hissed aloud. So I can go unpack, she hissed aloud. Oh, I'll show you, he rounded the corner and moved towards her. Kaylyn sighed once more and walked behind him, climbing the everlasting stairs again. Matthew strolled into a room opposite Sapphire's and paused at the door. This is your room, make yourself at home, he smiled. Kaylyn glanced around the room, big enough to be her previous apartment. It was nice, but still masculine in some way. Thanks. I'll be sure to lock myself in until the next 6 months, she quipped sardonically. Don't be melodramatic. There is an adjoining bathroom, so you'll have your own privacy. Are you ready to put your things away, Kaylyn? Sapphire came running in. Kaylyn smiled. Just about. Matthew chuckled and turned to leave when he paused. What's going on here? A voice demanded, followed by a long and awkward silence. Chapter 14. All eyes turned to the blonde that stood at the door, arms folded with an eyebrow raised by curiosity. Kaylyn swallowed, recognizing who the woman was. Catherine DeVille. She watched as the woman glared at her from head to toe, sending her an unpleasant once-over. Well, she insisted, clearly awaiting an answer. This is Kaylyn. She will be staying with us. Sapphire beamed cheerfully. Catherine's gaze left her and then shifted to Matthew, her eyes questioning. Kaylyn, excuse us for a minute please, he said, then turned to Catherine, ushering her out of the room. Kaylyn sighed heavily as they left the room. She felt like an intruder or some sort of homewrecker. She hoped the woman convinced Matthew to have her leave, because she did already not like the situation. What did Sapphire mean? Catherine asked as soon as they were far away enough so that they weren't at risk of being overheard. Exactly what she said, Matthew confirmed. Her eyes widened slightly. Who is she? Is she a family member? She asked curiously, blue eyes demanding. Matthew rubbed his temples. You're not going to like what I have to tell you, he warned. Catherine swallowed and lifted her chin a little higher. Well, what is it? Matthew sighed, thinking of a way he would make the situation more subtle. She's pregnant with my child, he said coolly, and Catherine gasped, shocked. Pregnant, she hissed bitterly, mouth agape. Matthew nodded, and before he could even open his mouth to say something else, he received a stinging slap to the face. How could you? Catherine spat in dismay. She's the woman I was in the paper with, he told her, and her eyes widened a bit more. That woman, she hissed in disbelief. Matthew's silence answered her question. And she's staying here? Do you really believe that child she's carrying is really yours, Matthew? Come on, I thought you were smarter than that, she exclaimed. Matthew sighed. The child is mine, Catherine, and as for bringing her here, that was my decision to make, he exclaimed. She raised a brow. Oh, and you didn't think it necessary to consult with me first? Your fiancé, she hissed. Matthew ground his tooth. Fiancé, not wife, he fired back a bit harshly. Catherine stepped back in bewilderment. I can't believe this. We are supposed to get married and here you are, housing your mistake and your soon-to-be bastard, she said angrily. Matthew lifted an accusatory index finger. Don't you dare, he bit out slowly, deadly. She snorted. So you're defending her now? She asked rhetorically. You should be happy I'm taking responsibility for my actions, he blared, and Catherine rolled her eyes. Not at the cost of my reputation, she snapped. How do you think it'll look on me when they find that the man I'm to marry has another woman pregnant and she's staying in his house? I will look like the mistress. I will look like the oddball, she spat, jabbing her thumb to her chest. A tear slipped from her eyes and she quickly brushed it away. Listen with text-to-speech. Powered by Trentley Audio. Out of respect for me, you could have at least provided for her stability while keeping her away from this house, but no, you just had to throw it in my face, didn't you? She snarled. I wanted to keep an eye on her so nothing happens to the baby, Matthew defended heatedly. Catherine snorted. Keep an eye on her? Matthew, you can't even keep an eye on the 6-year-old you already have here, she bit out. Sapphire's 5, he corrected firmly. Catherine shook her head, ignoring the statement. When my dad hears of this, you'll be sorry, she warned sternly. I am not indebted to you or your father. I am my own boss. I own my own company, he exclaimed proudly. And Catherine, I am sorry things had to be like this, but I think we can both agree that what we had was strictly sex and business, he shrugged. Don't, she spat. Don't say you're sorry when we damn well know you don't mean it. This engagement is off, she pulled the ring from her finger and slammed it to the counter. You will pay for hurting and embarrassing me, Matthew Mayhew. Mark my words, she seethed, and then strolled from the room. Matthew sighed and raked his hands through his hair, leaning against the counter. He picked up the diamond ring, twirling it around the tip of his index finger. He shrugged and shoved it into his pocket. He knew Catherine would be hurt, but he had to take responsibility for his actions, no matter what. The strong relationship shared with Bell Enterprises would be lost, but so be it. Kaylyn and Sapphire lay back on the bed, after having unpacked the suitcase. Kaylyn hadn't even realized she was falling asleep, until she felt her phone buzzing beside her on the bed. She jolted up and glanced at Sapphire, who was now watching her, with a slight smile on her face. She smiled, then picked up the phone, sighing when she saw Faith's picture and name pop up on the screen. Hey, she answered coolly. Where the hell are you? I'm banging on your door and you're not answering, so where the hell are you? She demanded through the phone. Oh, I didn't get the chance to tell you, Earl, Kaylyn began. Chance to tell me what? She cut in eagerly. Kaylyn used the tip of her tongue to moisten her lips. She swallowed. Kaylyn used the tip of her tongue to moisten her lips. She swallowed, wondering how she'd break the news to Faith. I'll meet me at Julie's Pastries in 20 minutes, she concluded. What is going on? Faith's concerned voice came. You'll find out as soon as we meet. Bye now. Wait. Kaylyn disconnected the call. Who was that? Came Sapphire's curious voice. That was my best friend. Judy is my best friend. She comes here sometimes for play dates, she beamed. Are you going to meet her now? She asked. Yes, I am. Can I come? She beamed with a bright smile. Kaylyn was unsure of how she'd answer that question. She didn't want to disappoint the child by saying no, but she had to, because she had private matters to discuss with Faye, matters she didn't want a young child, especially Sapphire, to hear. Not today, honey, but I promise I will, another time, she reasoned. Sapphire hung her head for a moment, then smiled. Okay. Pinky promise, she grinned, sticking out her pinky finger. Kaylyn stuck out hers and entwined it around Sapphire's small one. Promise, she said with a smile. Kaylyn glanced down at her attire and thought that she should wear something more appropriate to meet Faith. Her worn-out jeans and sweatshirt was not cutting it. Rummaging through the closet, she pulled out a pair of tight-fitted jeans and a blouse. She glanced at Sapphire, who watched her with immense curiosity, a smile still playing on her little pink lips. "How long are you staying here?" she asked, and Kaylyn knew the question was going to come, she just wasn't prepared to answer it. "I'm not sure yet, honey." Sapphire was silent and Kaylyn used that opportunity to scurry to the bathroom. "Where are you going?" Matthew asked as soon as Kaylyn was about to exit the house. She sighed. "Out." "Where?" he quipped. "I'm going to meet a friend," she exclaimed in frustration. "It'll be dark soon." "You can't go now," he bit out firmly, and Kaylyn snorted. "I'd like to see you try to stop me," she snarled, then went through the door. Chapter 15. Kaylyn was glad when she didn't get an argument from Matthew. After all, he wasn't the boss of her. If he planned on dictating the every move she made, he had another thing coming. The cab parked on the outside of the pastry shop and Kaylyn paid him before she exited. When she entered the small shop, she scanned the area thoroughly in search of Faith, and found her at the far end, sipping on something. She released a heavy sigh before she walked towards her friend, knowing that she would need some courage to fully explain to her what was going on. "Hey," she said when she arrived at the table, immediately taking a seat. "Took you long enough," Faith grumbled under her breath, placing the cup of what Kaylyn recognized to be hot chocolate on the table. Kaylyn rolled her eyes. "I didn't take long," she defended coolly. Faith didn't reply to that, instead she snapped her fingers to the woman behind the counter at the front. "What would you like to have?" she asked Kaylyn quickly. "Nothing." "I repeat, what would you like to have?" she asked, obviously not liking the answer Kaylyn had given. Kaylyn sighed. "Alright, a donut and a milkshake." Faith shook her head. "Fine, if you say so." The petite blonde walked to their table, with a put-on smile on her face. "What would you lovely ladies like to have?" she chirped. Faith plastered a fake grin on her face, while staring at the woman. Kaylyn stifled the laugh that rose at the back of her throat. "We'd like a donut, a slice of cheesecake, and a milkshake please," she provided, and the woman nodded after writing it down on a small notepad. She then left. Faith rolled her eyes, the grin immediately disappearing from her face. "Gosh, I hate that bitch," she exclaimed in disgust. "Why?" Kaylyn asked curiously. She shrugged. "I just don't like her face, and plus she's now my ex's girlfriend," she provided, and Kaylyn laughed, shaking her head. "Anyway, what's up?" "Why weren't you at your apartment?" she asked, arms folded on the table while she intently stared at her best friend. Kaylyn cleared her throat, licking her lips. She trailed off, feeling like a kid having to explain a bad deed to a parent. "I moved in with Matthew," she blurted after a moment's pause. "King did what?" Faith hissed. Her voice wasn't loud, and that was what scared Kaylyn. It was low, but held venom. "I'm sure you heard me, Faith," Kaylyn expelled sternly, straightening her posture. "And I'm waiting for you to tell me it's a lame joke," she exclaimed. "It's not," Kaylyn clarified. "You moved in with him?" She said the words, and Kaylyn could see it created a bitter result on her tongue. "I had to. He was making threats, and he was using force. I had no choice left in the matter," Kaylyn explained. "Making threats?" she asked, curiosity dripping from her voice. Kaylyn scratched her head. "Let's not get into that. I'll be staying there, until he's convinced that I am fine." "I will be fine." "You can dash." The girl came with their orders on a tray, and Faith trailed off as soon as she came. "Thank you," they both said in unison, before the waitress left. "You can't just move in with an engaged man," Faith continued ruefully. "Don't you think I feel bad about that, Faye, but I'm helpless at the moment," she exclaimed warily. "You better know what you're doing, because those people will use their money to destroy people like us," she warned, and Kaylyn took a bite of the donut, knowing that her words were true. Lilith Fisher dropped her bag on the small table as soon as she heard the phone ringing in the kitchen. Closing the door, she briskly walked in the direction. "Honey, you're home," her husband, Patrick, greeted her, descending the stairs. "Didn't you hear the phone ringing?" she huffed in frustration, sighing. When the ringing stopped, "I was coming down to answer," the middle-aged man told her as he walked towards her. He kissed her lightly on the mouth and moved towards the refrigerator. Lilith picked up the phone and sighed, wondering who it might have been. "Have you eaten, dear?" she asked her husband. "I was thinking we could go out for dinner tonight," came the reply. "Oh, that'd be dashed." The phone began to ring again, and unhesitatingly, she answered it. "Fisher's residence," she announced. "Hello, Lilith," a cheerful voice came. "It's Catherine." "Oh, Catherine. Hello, darling. How are you?" she asked, smiling at the pleasing surprise. "Well, I'm not too well. I just called because I just recently found out you have a daughter," Catherine said on the other end. The smile on Lilith's face dropped. It's a matter I'd rather leave in the past, dear," she said, batting her lashes. Catherine knew that, but it was all she needed to ignite an old flame. "Oh, do you remember my fiancé Matthew?" she asked, changing the topic. "Of course, when is the wedding?" she chirped in excitement. "We haven't confirmed a date yet," she lied. "But we're planning an engagement party. We'd like for you and Patrick to come." Her voice was gentle. "Oh, Patrick and I would have to book a flight to New York, but we'll definitely be there." "When is it?" she asked. "I'll text you the details," Catherine provided. "Okay, darling. We'll chat soon," she said before disconnecting the call. Catherine grinned on the other end. Her plan was working perfectly. After having I pull up information about Kaylyn Fisher, she was surprised as well as ecstatic when she learned that her very good family friend Lilith Fisher was the mother of the very same Kaylyn Fisher. She wondered why Kaylyn was so lowly and her parents were rich business tycoons in California. Whatever the reason was, she was planning on finding out, because when old friends met after a long time, secrets were bound to spill. Soon, she would give Kaylyn Fisher the shock of her life, and Matthew. He would also live to regret hurting her, but time was the master, and in time they'd know her wrath. Catherine smiled, slowly spinning herself in the chair around her desk. The game of revenge was going to be a sweet one she was positive on winning.